I'm not pulling out the driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for another Drive to Work at Home edition. So today I have Taylor Ingvarsson here to talk about art. So Taylor, you were the main art director, right, for Brothers War, is that correct?
Yep. From concept push, early world building, and through commissioning.
Okay, so let's do all of that. Let's start at the very beginning. So what's the very first thing you were told about the set?
That we were doing the Brothers War, and I immediately had to go read these books. But no, it was super cool. It was really loose. It just basically we wanted to go back and revisit the Brothers War and do this as a Magic set. So creative lead Emily Tang and myself basically set out to just read the book many times over, and then Miguel, when he came on to the scene, do the same thing and try and figure out ways that we could update the novel into a card set, which was at the time felt very challenging. And there are things that I'm super happy that we did, and some things that worked out just great for the card set, but we just wanted to try and capture everything that we possibly could from the novel, staying true to it, while kind of bringing in our own vision and things that we could update or blow out that the novel didn't really mention all that much.
Yeah, I just want to mention for the audience to understand. So Antiquities existed as a set, but we don't see the Brothers War. They dig up Antiquities from the Brothers War. So there's no visualness of the Brothers War other than a few random objects. The novel, Jeff Grubb wrote a novel, but it's a novel. It's all in prose. And other than a few really sporadic card images, there was no visual imagery of what the Brothers War looked like.
Yeah, no, 100%. We took a lot of inspiration from the Antiquity set, like you mentioned, but we couldn't just recreate that. Some of those things were pretty bananas. I'm not going to even attempt to get the card names right, but some were I think there was a shovel-looking machine with legs running around, which is pretty cool. But the project really left us a lot of creative freedom to explore and build things out for the setting of the Brothers War and kind of build out what Terra Sierra looked like thousands of years ago before we see it on the map in current Dominaria. There are a lot of things. Oh yeah.
I'm saying, what was your visual when you first built the world? What was your visual through line? What was it you wanted the world to look like? What guided you?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that were going around of should we just make this look old? And that wasn't really the idea that we wanted to run with. We wanted everyone to feel like they were very successful and in their craftsmanship and sort of civilizations that they built on this continent. But the biggest visual through line was that we knew we wanted this to be about robots, mechanically and thematically. So we really, really wanted everything to feel like everything was being adapted to deal with robots being built, and everything like that. We wanted it to really feel like a cinematic approach to this novel, like we were making a movie nowadays.
Now, was it important that Mishra and Urza had distinctive qualities visually?
Yeah, absolutely. So the novel does a really good job of sort of setting the brothers up and showing how different they are, especially once they split. So Urza goes off and, long story short, kind of has a simpler, easier life, I guess, so to speak, where he always finds himself in seats of power. And Mishra kind of has a little bit more of a harder life growing up after they split. So we wanted that to come through in both their designs. Urza's always very powerful and staunch looking, from the Urza everybody knows, the long hair, the gray beard. And then we just sort of deconstructed his look for 3 different acts that we wanted to do with this story, just to try and capture a decades-long conflict. So he's always kind of clean cut, very stately looking and a little bit bigger and more powerful. And Mishra, we wanted to feel like sort of the 90s bad boy, heartthrob biker guy throughout the setting. So that visually you could obviously just tell the brothers apart and hopefully capture what their attitudes were about just by taking a peek at them. We actually, the Mishra that we riffed off of pretty hard was inspired by, I think it was an old Scott Fisher piece. I can't remember if it's a Mishra card or just like a Mishra spell card, but really got that, I forget the name of the hairstyle, but all the TV shows back in the 90s had that sort of like bowl cut. No, not bowl cut. That's the wrong word for that.
So you're talking about Mishra Artificial Prodigy, which
Yes,
was from
that's the one.
Time Spiral. Scott Fisher
Yes.
was the artist. So it's the first time Mishra ever got a card. It's a legendary creature of Mishra. He actually got one before Urza, if you don't count Blind Seer from long ago. So you had they physically had a different look. Did their inventions? Did you try to separate how the creations of Urza differentiated from the creations of Mishra?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking their personalities into account was a huge inspiration for their machines and the design of their mechs. Trying to keep that same through line coming across, we sort of pictured Urza as more of like a defensive player on the battlefield. So all of his machines are, well, both their machines are huge, but or can be huge, but very like big and imposing, bulky silhouettes that feel pretty slow but incredibly powerful, sort of like a heavyweight boxer on the battlefield. So you could just imagine sort of just like legions of these things lining up and creating like an immovable wall, essentially, to try and get through. Where Mishra's, we wanted everything to feel like super fast and aggressive and sharp, like he just wants to get across the battlefield as fast as possible to tear apart his brother's machines. There's also just like a hint of Phyrexian influence in a lot of Mishra's designs, just trying to weave in as many little plot points as we possibly can of him being sort of haunted by nightmares of Phyrexia and his experience there. So that's really what we wanted to get across in their robot design, is really trying to have them be reflections of their own personalities and how they sort of look at the world. There's also a bunch of fun stuff where this is sort of like where it comes in with inspiration from the Antiquities set and then just designs from the 90s from other magazines or cartoons or movies back then. Like everything sort of has like this, it's like a layer of grit on it, both like in the artwork or just is everything very textural and I feel like when you run your hand across it, it would be a little bit gritty. And also everything kind of has this, I don't know, I said awkward chunk a lot during the development of this one, but what I meant was leaning more into just like really awesome shape language that didn't necessarily have to make sense if you were going to build it today. Obviously we want things to be believable, but that's sort of the way we wanted to try and pay homage to the previous Magic sets, and just sort of the art and time period of the 90s was apply some grit to everything and then bring out these like really big shapes that might feel a little bit precarious if you put them on them.
Can you explain to the audience what is, when you say shape language, what does that mean when you talk about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So everything has a particular shape language, and that's how you know it belongs to that particular group or faction. So shape language is just literally like really leaning into how you want to describe how something looks, and very much just like a visual language. So when you see one of Mishra's robots, you know exactly right off the bat, oh, that's one of Mishra's bots and not one of Urza's machines. So that's generally what I mean by that.
And how did the shape language change between the two? Like, how do you visually know it's Urza versus Mishra?
Yeah, so kind of like what I was saying earlier, Urza's machines are very clean and big and bulky, and Mishra's machines are very lithe and aggressive and very fast looking. I wanted them to feel sort of like hot rods zipping across the desert. So that's kind of how they vary. Mishra's are very lithe and fast, and Urza's are very big and bulky.
You also bring up the 90s a lot. So obviously the original Brothers War story came from the 90s. It was created in the 90s. Were you trying to get sort of a look that sort of had a nod to the 90s?
Yeah, absolutely. The Brothers War was a fun moving target to hit where you wanted to stay true to the source material, but you wanted to kind of like update it through the modern lens. So the 90s had a huge influence on where we wanted to go visually with this particular set. Everything from just taking inspirations from popular TV shows at the time and letting that inspire some shapes, especially for Gix. If you relook at his design, very inspired from a lot of popular villains and sort of like cartoon shows of that time period, as well as the original awesome art that we have of Gix from back in the day. So yeah, absolutely. The 90s played a huge role in the visual development for the Brothers War.
So I want to bring up a different decade now. So the 1910s. So I know one of the things that you guys talked a lot about was looking at some of the visual iconography of World War I. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the conflict of the Brothers War takes place over decades, and we were kind of beating our heads against the wall of like, how are we going to do a decades-long conflict in a Magic setting? Magic is an incredible game, but with stories it can be a little bit tricky sometimes because it's a non-linear story delivery vehicle. So one thing that we came up with was trying to do breaking the story up into 3 acts to try and show the brothers' progression throughout their lives. But the other big thing that we wanted to play around with was the idea of sort of trench warfare being sort of a vehicle to allow us to just show how long and drawn out this conflict is. And so World War I, we have our own unfortunate examples of this, of people just hunkering down and trying to do the best they could to sort of adapt to a change in how warfare was conducted, and it just feeling like a slow slog of a fight. So that had a big influence on the environmental cues for Brothers War also.
So real quickly, you mentioned this, so the audience might not be aware. When we talk about 3 parts of the story, like the 3 acts of the story, so in War of the Spark, which was another set that followed the story, the 3 acts were like morning, noon, and night. Like they were 3 parts of the day. But this set takes place, I believe, over 7 decades, correct? 70 years.
Yeah. Yes,
so Act 1, they're boys, right? They're going to the Cave of Koilos and finding the power, the Might Stone and the Meek Stone. Act 2, which is I think the longest, is kind of the middle of their life, and then Act 3 is the end, which they're old men.
Yeah. So Act 1 is it very much spends a lot of time as them with kids and their mentor Tokesia, and it basically leads up into the brothers splitting, Tokesia's unfortunate demise, and then basically the evidence of the start of the war. And then Act 2 is the biggest time span I think that we spend within each of the 3 acts. You'll start to see trenches being built, tank traps, factories being put up in the environment. And then that's where like the bulk of all the high action fighting happens and takes place on cards, is within Act 2, and like the seeing crazy machines and big old dragon engines and all that stuff. And then Act 3, everything is sort of like the main continent of Terracier has been just strip mined of all of its resources. It's a desolate like mudscape full of dilapidated machines. The sky is choked with smog, and it's very dark and gloomy. But we wanted to bring like a little bit of color into it, so everything didn't feel so down in the dumps and just brown on cards. So we wanted to try and play around with the idea that as good as the brothers are, they couldn't really crack the code of studying the Thran artifacts way back when they were boys in the caves. So we tried to come up with showing that because they weren't they couldn't crack the code of how the Thran built their machines. So with their own machines, they're still awesome and huge and big and very powerful, but their power stones degrade over time. So in Act 3, you'll see these like magical little twinkles of twilight floating around in the air. And that was sort of like our little nod at trying to show again just how long everything's been going on, and even these magnificent machines are degrading and starting to poison the atmosphere a little bit. Act 3 is also sort of where we get this like really big contrast in environment, because the brothers go from the main continent of Tertiary over to the island of Argoth for more resources, because they're constantly just wanting to keep this conflict going for someone to be the victor. So there we get to really like elevate the high fantasy, and that's where we'll see Titania and her forces of like tree folk and elves and sprites going toe to toe with these robots. I've mentioned it before in a couple different spots, but some of my favorite pieces are just seeing tree folk cleave through robots, or a sprite like jump out of the chest of a robot as it's exploding in the background. It was a really fun act to play around in, because you have this absolutely depressing situation on the main land, and then you get to come to this beautiful island of Argoth that's like the picture perfect vacation spot, beautiful beaches, lovely forests, and then they didn't want anything to do with the conflict, but they're gonna do everything to defend their homeland. So it's Act 3 has a lot going on in it. It's really, really fun to play up that contrast.
Yeah, one of the tricky things, I've joked that this set was a little bit like a Universes Beyond set, in the sense that the story was already locked in, right? Normally when we build a magic world, well, if we need something, we build it in. But this story was kind of a locked, known story. And the Argoth, the reason we spent so much time in Argoth is, like, there's nothing for green. None of the story had any green in it. And we had to find places to stick green. So let's talk a little bit about, we talked a lot about the world building, but let's talk a little bit about getting artists. So one of the things that I find really fascinating is the artists vary from set to set. Like, it's not like it's the exact same number of artists and the next set is completely the same artist. Like, we have a pool, but you want to adapt which artist you choose to the world you're building. We talk a little bit about, like, what did Brothers War want?
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, just going back to green with artifacts. This was very much an area where we got to sort of take some liberties with the source material and kind of fill in some of the gaps just for the needs of the card set. So artifacts in green doesn't happen like a lot. So this is where we sort of got to like play around with scrappers sort of putting together their own machines, or magical tree vines sort of taking over shells of Mishra or Urza's bots and like reanimating them and kind of walking around. None of that's really mentioned in the story or anything like that. But so that was a fun little twist that we got to play, just so that we could fill out some green automatons, which was a ton of fun. But shifting over to your other question for what does Brothers War want with as far as artists goes, it was sort of trying to hit a similar target as how we kind of approach the set in general. Being able to bring back some artists that have been doing work for Magic for a long time was something that we wanted to bring into the fold for this set as well. Richard Kane Ferguson did a card for this. I think it's like Dispel or something like that. Forgive me if I got that card wrong. And Mark Jadine did some stuff for Commander, and really trying to like capture what was really awesome about fantasy art from back in the day, and allow that to come into the Brothers War was really important to us, as well as making it feel like approaching this as sort of like a cinematic movie. Like, we wanted it to feel like people were going and sitting down in the movie theater and getting to watch like Michael Bay create the Brothers War, and see all these beautiful things on the screen. Selecting artists and creating like your perfect plan for each set is always a fun challenge. It's a giant puzzle. I call it like the Sudoku step of what we do, because once somebody is unable to take something, it can affect like the next 20 people's assignments. So you're always trying to set the artists up for success the best way you can, and give them assignments that feel like they're tailored for them. We do that a lot of ways by either adjusting what we're asking for to fit what the artist is great at, or adjusting who's assigned to this particular card to make sure that they can actually achieve what we need them to achieve for this.
Can you give an example of an artist and like how we adapted? Like we gave them this card because they're good at this thing.
Yeah. Okay. Let me think for this particular set.
Also, while you're thinking, I did look it up. Disenchant was the Richard Kane Ferguson picture.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, Joe Meehan comes to mind. I wanted someone who could bring.
Say his name one more time.
Joe Meehan. She's a fantastic artist. I wanted there's this item in the story called the Silex, and it's really just a bowl when you think about it. It's a magical dish. It's a lot cooler in the narrative and the fantasy of it and Magic's history. Mm-hmm. But design-wise, it really is. It's a bowl. So we put some Fran engravings in there, but it was a great example of the event pairing with the artist to try and make this something very exciting and sort of express how magically powerful this particular item is.
Yeah, let me get some context to the audience because they might not be aware. So the Urza Silex, Urza uses it to end the war. It's the thing he uses basically which blows everything up. And in the modern story, the reason Teferi's going back in time is he needs to learn about the Silex. And so he needs Saheeli to make a copy of the Silex. So this is like very, very central to the entire story and very pivotal in the actual original Brothers War. It's the item he uses to end the war. It's super, super pivotal. It's a very destructive element. And the art has to show how destructive it is. That's an important part of the art.
Yeah, we needed this to feel very powerful. And we took a little bit of liberties with this as well too. Like just like what you were saying, if you look at a modern map of Dominaria and a Brothers War era map of Dominaria, the shattered island of Orgoth is because this Silex was activated. So this Silex blew up the entire island, triggered all the events that happened on Dominaria, such as the Ice Age, after the Brothers War. So it is an item that is not to be trifled with. So Joe was able to bring like just sort of an epic level of awesomeness to this particular piece. It's right after the Silex went off. So there's like the earth is sort of cracked and shattered, but the Silex is still glowing and floating almost like nothing happened. And I think that particular image on that card could have gone so many ways. But I think he was really able to capture just how magical and powerful this particular item is.
Okay. In other images that come to mind of just like this artist or this image really captured something?
Yeah. Reimagining Gix and bringing them to life, both in the card set and in the concept push, was really, really fun. There's a bunch of artists that sort of went into the hand for these. There's a lot of artists that did a lot of stuff for the set, and then a lot of great artists that really, really helped us out in the concept push. Anna Steinbauer redesigned Gix during the concept push, and she did a fantastic job going back and forth with me and really updating Gix's design and also the Brotherhood of Gix and just sort of how the thinking behind how Gix would sort of manipulate his followers or place his hand in their heads to see what they've seen. But Anna Podemorna illustrated the card for Gix in the Brothers War and is just absolutely incredible. We really wanted to capture that moment where Gix is coming through the Phyrexian portal. So I wanted somebody who could really bring a lot of that energy and just like imposing will that Gix has and could have to the card, and she absolutely blew that card out of the water. It's one of my favorite pieces in the set for sure.
Yeah, it's a very impressive piece. One thing about doing a podcast, it's very hard to talk about images. So guys, as we're talking about this, you got to go look up the images. So this is Gix Yawgmoth Praetor. Go look up the images so you can see what we're talking about. But they're really cool. Yeah, and the other interesting thing is the Phyrexians. There was a balance we had to strike because they play a role in the Brothers' War, but not a big role. But right. In the larger story, they play a very big part. So, like, we both wanted to make sure that we represented the Phyrexians, but not have them take over, because the Brothers' War really isn't about Phyrexia. I mean, they influence Mishra, but...
Yeah, there's also a... newer to card sets, I believe this is the first time he worked on a card set with us, but he's been doing concept work with us for a while. Leon Tucker absolutely crushed all of his cards with... I believe he did 6 cards for Brothers War.
It looks like he did 7 cards for Brothers War.
7 cards. Oh, because he did the promo too for Mishra's Foundry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like Mishra's Foundries, just giant mechs throughout the story.
Yeah. Let me say what he did real quickly. So he did Platoon Dispenser, Skitter Beam Battalion, Root Wire Amalgam, Clay Champion, Aeronaut's Wings, Cityscape Leveler, and as you said, Mishra's Foundry. So
and he's been great, and we've been using him ever since for continuing to do concept art and on cards, and I hope to continue to use him more.
Yeah, I know one of the things the audience isn't aware, but I know you're very acutely aware, is artists as a resource is a very valuable resource. So we have a lot of cards to make, we have a lot of art to do, and so I know you guys are constantly looking for new artists while working with lots of existing artists. How many new artists do you tend to on a set? How many new artists do you usually do on Brothers War? You know how many new artists were on Brothers War?
Gosh, I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth on this one.
I mean, make a guess on number. It's not I'm
gonna guess on Brothers War 5 to 10 new artists. But in general, there's so much stuff going on right now. So the pool is always expanding. I think right now we have 800 something on our that we work with on our artist roster, and it's always rotating. So we always like finding new voices to help us tell our stories, and just bring incitement to this brand. So if you're a Magic artist, feel free to reach out or meet one of us at an event or chat us up. We're more than happy to talk. So
yeah,
when we have time.
it is amazing, like I said, because we keep bouncing around. Like every set is very different than this is the Brothers War, but earlier in the year we were doing 1920s Magic, or we were doing Kamigawa, which was very sort of more modern, and I don't know. I find it fascinating. Just you guys keep knocking on the part, but we keep here's this. This is completely different. We're doing this thing now.
Yeah, we get to work with a ton of great folks, and it does rotate based on the ask of the particular world or what we want to achieve with it. But we're always hoping to keep people happy and hope that they're happy working on Magic, and hope to just keep working with everybody. It's great.
So I'm almost at my desk here. So any final thoughts about the visualness of the Brothers War, of making all the mini arts and all the world building and everything? Any final thoughts on Brothers War?
Yeah, I think there was a lot to generate and create for the Brothers War, and it was all incredibly exciting. And I think they're all the different factions were so much fun to take on. They had their own unique challenges, between the Brotherhood of Gix, the Third Path, the Philagi, which were super fun to work on and reimagine, Argive, the people of Argive, Yotia. It was really, really, really exciting to just sort of let all those different cultures kind of have their own personality shine through, and be able to give them some spotlight outside of just the two brothers. I think that for me was one of the most fun parts about this particular Magic set, is that we got to highlight characters and peoples that didn't get the page count in the novel, but were super important to the story. So I think that was really, really fun to do with this particular set. They're set.
Well, I should say, I loved how it turned out. I think it looks great. I mean, I'm an old time Magic player, right? I remember opening up Antiquities packs, and back then, like, the Antiquities really kind of hinted at the story, but didn't show the story. So it's really exciting now to, like, actually see the story in a way that we've never really done before. So that's awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I'm glad you like it, Mark.
But anyway, I want to thank you for joining us today. So thank you, Taylor, for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And to everybody else, I can see my desk. So we all know what that means. I mean, this is my end to drive to work. So instead of talking magic, it's time for me to be making magic. So once again, thanks for being with us, Taylor. And to all of you, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.